Finally, the waiting is over, but what was supposed to be a monumental cinematic event has left the entire fandom in a state of absolute disbelief. Spider-Man: Brand New Day has officially hit theaters worldwide, and after processing every frame, digesting the plot points, and watching the community's reaction unfold in real time, there is only one undeniable conclusion to draw. This film falls drastically below average, failing to deliver on nearly every promise made during its massive promotional campaign. For months, fans crafted intricate theories, dissecting every frame of the trailers, expecting a dark, grounded, and emotionally complex next chapter for Peter Parker. We believed those specific trailer beats held the key to a massive narrative shift. Yet, in what feels like an insulting creative decision, almost every single piece of promotional footage was dumped into a brief, rushed opening montage right at the beginning of the movie. Everything we thought was being built up was essentially discarded before the title card even dropped, setting the tone for a narrative that feels fundamentally broken from its very first act. When you peel back the slick visuals and look directly at the underlying narrative architecture, the story and plot are astonishingly weak. It is a genuine shame because the lead actors actually turn in solid performances with the material they were given, trying their absolute best to anchor the emotional beats. But when the foundation itself is this hollow, even great acting cannot salvage the final product. By the time the credits roll, you aren't left with a sense of awe or dynamic excitement. You are left with the lingering frustration of having wasted your time. Even the most die-hard Spider-Man loyalists, the fans who defend almost every MCU project through thick and thin, are openly admitting that this is a deeply flawed, low-tier Spider-Man entry. Social media is currently flooded with overwhelming disappointment, as millions who held sky-high expectations are realizing they paid for a third-class experience. Aside from a few visually impressive swinging sequences through the city streets, the core film degrades into a narrative mess that barely holds together under basic scrutiny. Consider one of the most hyped aspects leading into release: the entire premise of Peter's mutation. Before the movie came out, the internet was ablaze with theories about how his changing DNA would introduce body horror elements, heighten the stakes, or evolve his powers in a shocking new direction. But the moment the film actually attempts to explain the mechanics of his mutation, it completely falls apart. The explanation is so poorly handled, so devoid of real scientific or comic book logic, that it feels like a slap in the face to anyone who paid attention to the build-up. Instead of exploring the psychological and physical toll of this mutation, the narrative continually backtracks, getting stuck in a repetitive loop that destroys any real dynamic pacing. We get endless scenes of Peter hoping MJ remembers him, followed by the tragic realization that she doesn't, followed by Peter breaking down in tears, only for the exact same emotional beat to repeat itself again 20 minutes later. Rather than moving Peter's character forward, the writing traps him in an endless cycle of emotional wallowing that quickly loses its impact. This structural repetition is further crippled by the severe lack of a compelling antagonist. A great Spider-Man story relies heavily on a strong villain who challenges the hero's morals, philosophy, and physical capabilities. Here, Jean Grey, portrayed by Sadie Sink, is initially framed as the central, formidable threat. The marketing implied a terrifying, powerful force that Spider-Man would have to outsmart and outfight. Yet, as the story progresses, her complex antagonist setup dissolves into an uninspired, sudden change of heart driven by childish tropes. It becomes painfully obvious as the movie progresses that this script was not written to give Spider-Man a meaningful story arc. Instead, the entire feature film feels like a glorified, multi-million-dollar character introduction for Jean Grey into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Using a flagship superhero like Spider-Man, the most iconic character in Marvel history, merely as a launching pad to introduce another character represents one of the single biggest missed opportunities in cinematic Spider-Man history. The narrative padding becomes even more obvious when you look at the forced fan service shoehorned into the runtime. We are given an extended cameo from Frank Castle, the Punisher, alongside a brief appearance by the Hulk, both of which feel completely detached from the core plot. Instead of integrating these major figures into the central conflict with real narrative purpose, their presence exists purely to spark cheap theater reactions and generate trailer clicks. They show up, perform their signature moves, and leave without leaving any meaningful impact on Peter's emotional journey or the stakes of the story. It is the definition of superficial storytelling, relying on brand recognition rather than writing scenes that organic narrative momentum demands. And unfortunately, this reliance on artificial hype reaches its absolute worst during the film's climax, where the entire conflict collapses under the weight of lazy writing and bizarre character choices. The final battle is shockingly pathetic, stripping away any real tension or cinematic weight in favor of melodrama. Jean's sudden villain-to-hero redemption happens in a matter of seconds, completely undermining the threat she posed earlier in the film. But the moment that truly breaks any remaining suspension of disbelief involves Frank Castle. During the climax, Frank fires a sniper shot at Jean from a kilometer away, a distance so vast that it makes no tactical sense in the context of the scene. Spider-Man, driven by his instinct to save everyone, leaps into the path of the bullet, taking the hit himself. Then, in a bizarre sequence of events, Jean uses her powers to magically heal and save Spider-Man. The entire sequence feels utterly childish, lacking any of the raw, grounded tension that made previous Spider-Man climaxes so unforgettable. It feels less like a high-stakes superhero blockbuster and more like a poorly constructed Saturday morning cartoon sequence. What makes this narrative failure even harder to digest is the sheer wasted potential regarding the broader MCU timeline. Spider-Man: Brand New Day had a golden opportunity to set the stage for Avengers: Doomsday, acting as a crucial connective bridge for the multiverse saga. Fans were expecting at least a subtle hint, a terrifying revelation, or an incursion event in the post-credits scene to indicate that the multiverse was collapsing around Earth 616. If the filmmakers had provided even a small, meaningful tether to the looming threat of Doomsday, audiences might have forgiven some of the movie's earlier narrative shortcomings. Instead, the mid- and post-credits sequence centers around an absurd plot device: the Spider Tracker mobile application developed by Ned Leeds. The scene reveals that the app can no longer pinpoint Spider-Man's location on Earth. The camera zooms all the way out from the planet, panning into the deep cosmic vacuum of space before displaying a text notification: "New Spider-Man found." Immediately following the premiere, fan theorists rushed online to claim that this cosmic signal is a brilliant setup for Avengers: Doomsday, suggesting the app somehow locked onto Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man right as his alternate universe faces destruction. But when you apply even a fraction of logical critical thinking to this concept, the entire theory and the scene itself collapses into utter nonsense. The idea that a basic smartphone application created by a high school student can magically cross dimensional boundaries and track superpowered individuals across the multiverse is fundamentally absurd. First, how does this app even track Spider-Man on Earth in the first place? Does it only work when he is wearing the suit? Why doesn't it ping when he is dressed as Peter Parker? What mechanism is actually detecting his presence? The movie completely fails to establish the internal logic of this technology. We know for a fact that it isn't relying on public CCTV cameras or facial recognition, because earlier in the film, the app pinpoints Spider-Man's exact location inside MJ's private apartment, a place with zero public surveillance. So, what is the audience expected to believe? Is the app somehow scanning the atmosphere for spider DNA or tracking subtle biological mutations? If that's the case, it elevates a simple phone application into a magical, omnipotent plot device that feels completely detached from grounded reality. In a world where high-tech villains and government agencies constantly hunt heroes, an app that broadcasts Spider-Man's exact location with zero security clearance means any villain with basic hacking skills could locate and destroy Peter Parker in seconds. It is a fairy tale gadget masquerading as modern technology, written with zero regard for how technology functions within the established world. If the internal mechanics on Earth are already ridiculous, the post-credits reveal taking this app into deep space elevates the writing to an entirely new level of narrative laziness. How is a mobile application built on standard human coding suddenly sending and receiving signals across light years of space or through alternate dimensions? Where are the servers? Where is the satellite relay? Where is the cosmic infrastructure capable of processing a data transmission across reality itself? Even Tony Stark, with unlimited financial capital, alien technology, and groundbreaking genius, struggled to maintain instantaneous communication across distant planets without specialized hardware like the Benatar or quantum relays. Yet we are expected to swallow the idea that Ned Leeds, a teenager working on a standard laptop without billion-dollar research facilities or extraterrestrial tech, wrote an algorithm that casually scans the universe and detects alternate Spider-Men in distant realities. It is impossible not to feel a sense of absolute frustration when looking at how dumbed down this writing has become. At the start of this review, it was easy to categorize Spider-Man: Brand New Day as merely an average, underwhelming blockbuster. But when you break down the sheer absurdity of the Ned Leeds tracking app and how the filmmakers used it as the ultimate post-credits hook, the mild disappointment turns into genuine anger. It takes a staggering level of creative indifference to expect a mature audience to accept that a basic mobile app, which looks visually like a mobile game from the mid-2000s, can operate without servers, satellite arrays, or multiverse jump gates to locate heroes across the cosmos. It isn't just bad writing. It is a fundamental breakdown of basic internal logic that treats the audience as if they have zero critical thinking capacity. When you step back and look at the entire project, Spider-Man: Brand New Day isn't a film designed for longtime comic fans, nor is it designed for viewers who appreciated the grounded emotional weight of previous installments. It is a film written exclusively for young children, completely stripped of mature consequences, logical world building, or meaningful character development. The core story exists almost entirely as a commercial vehicle to introduce Jean Grey, establishing her as the MCU's first major mutant ahead of the upcoming mutant saga following Secret Wars. Using Spider-Man as a prop to service future corporate slate announcements while surrounding him with childish tech devices and nonsensical plot developments renders this entry a massive misfire. For any viewer looking for depth, real stakes, or smart storytelling, this movie fails to deliver on every single front, standing as one of the most disappointing entries in modern superhero cinema. The frustration only deepens when you examine how this narrative disrespects the emotional legacy built across the previous trilogy. Spider-Man: No Way Home left Peter Parker in a devastating, deeply compelling place, completely forgotten by the world, stripped of his Stark technology, and forced to rebuild his life from scratch as a true neighborhood-level street hero. That tragic sacrifice promised a gritty, grounded future where Peter's intellect and resilience would be pushed to their absolute limits. Instead, this film completely undermines that brilliant foundation by reintroducing absurd, convenience-based plot mechanics that render his isolation meaningless. Instead of showing Peter adapt as a brilliant, solitary scientist making real gear out of spare parts, the narrative relies on magical shortcuts like Ned's tracker app to move the plot forward. It trivializes the weight of Peter's choice, proving that the writers had no real interest in exploring the actual consequences of a hero who lost everything, choosing instead to reset the stakes whenever the plot hit a wall. This fundamental lack of consequences bleeds into the entire structure of the movie's action sequences. In a top-tier Spider-Man film, every fight scene carries emotional weight, physical danger, or a tactical puzzle that Peter must solve using his quick wit and spider sense. Here, the action feels entirely hollow, visual noise designed solely to fill a runtime. The swinging mechanics, while visually slick in isolated moments, lack any sense of real momentum or gravity. Spider-Man bounces off buildings and dodges attacks with zero tension because the narrative never establishes what he is actually fighting for in those moments. Even when he is pushed into physical danger, the resolution is handed to him on a silver platter rather than earned through strategy or perseverance. When a hero doesn't have to suffer, adapt, or outsmart his opponents, the audience loses all emotional investment in the outcome of the battle. Look at how the film handles Peter's intellect, or rather the total absence of it. Comic book fans know that Peter Parker is one of the sharpest scientific minds in the Marvel Universe, a genius who frequently outsmarts cosmic entities and technological masterminds. Yet in Brand New Day, Peter is written as completely passive, constantly reacting to the chaos around him rather than taking initiative. He doesn't investigate the mechanics of his own mutation. He just freaks out and waits for other characters to explain it to him. He doesn't devise a clever strategic counter to Jean Grey's overwhelming powers. He simply rushes in blindly and relies on her having a sudden, unearned moral awakening. By stripping Peter of his scientific brilliance and problem-solving agency, the script turns him into a bystander in his own movie, forcing him to take a back seat while external forces and shoehorn cameos dictate the direction of the narrative. Speaking of those shoehorn cameos, the inclusion of Frank Castle is perhaps the most glaring example of a missed thematic opportunity. The Punisher and Spider-Man represent two fundamentally opposing philosophies on justice, morality, and human life. In the comics, their interactions are charged with intense ideological conflict. Peter's unwavering belief in the sanctity of life constantly clashing with Frank's ruthless, lethal pragmatism. A proper crossover between these two icons should have forced Peter to defend his moral compass against a battle-hardened vigilante who views his restraint as weakness. Instead, Frank Castle's appearance is reduced to a brainless action beat. He shows up, fires off weapons, adds zero depth to Peter's moral struggle, and ultimately serves as nothing more than a mechanical trigger to get Spider-Man shot in the climax. It is an absolute waste of one of the most compelling dynamics in Marvel history. The exact same problem plagues the brief inclusion of the Hulk. Rather than using Bruce Banner to provide actual scientific insight into Peter's genetic mutation, Banner is uniquely qualified to analyze. His presence is treated like a quick checklist item to keep young audiences entertained. There is no meaningful dialogue, no intellectual exchange, and no emotional resonance. He appears, displays a brief demonstration of brute force, and vanishes from the plot entirely. When a studio uses legendary characters as mere background props to create illusionary scale, it betrays a complete lack of faith in the core story being told. It shows that the filmmakers knew the main narrative was too weak to stand on its own feet. So they threw in recognizable faces to distract the audience from the glaring plot holes. This distraction technique becomes painfully obvious during the entire middle act, where the pacing grinds to an agonizing halt. A well-constructed screenplay builds momentum as it moves toward the climax, escalating the stakes with every scene. In Brand New Day, the middle section feels like a series of disconnected vignettes that endlessly loop over the same emotional notes. Peter wanders around the city, broods over his lost identity, tries and fails to interact with MJ, and then retreats back into isolation. There is no narrative momentum, no sense of a ticking clock, and no active investigation driving the conflict forward. It feels less like a cohesive 2-hour feature film and more like a collection of rejected television scenes stitched together to meet a theatrical runtime requirement. Even the romantic tension between Peter and MJ, which should have been the emotional heart of the story, feels utterly dry and contrived. The strength of their relationship in previous films came from shared struggles, mutual trust, and organic chemistry. Here, because MJ has no memory of who Peter is, their interactions are reduced to awkward, uncomfortable encounters that go nowhere. Peter's constant hesitation and inability to communicate create a dynamic that isn't romantic or tragic. It's just frustrating to watch. Instead of finding a mature, creative way for Peter to navigate this tragedy, either by letting her go to protect her or earning her trust anew as a stranger, the script has him act like a helpless teenager standing outside her window, repeating the exact same melancholic beat until the film simply decides it's time for the final fight. When you analyze the character arc of Sadie Sink's Jean Grey, the structural problems become even more severe. Introducing a character as historically powerful and complex as Jean Grey requires immense narrative real estate. Her comic origins are deeply tied to cosmic entities, mutant identity, and intense psychological trauma. Cramming her origin, her rise as a threat, and her ultimate redemption into the background of a Spider-Man movie does a massive disservice to her character while simultaneously robbing Spider-Man of a proper rogues gallery showcase. She isn't given the space to become a terrifying antagonist, nor is she given the writing required to make her sudden turn to good feel earned. She is simply pushed around by the script's mechanical needs, shifting from dangerous threat to heroic savior whenever the writer needs to wrap up a scene. This lazy approach to character motivations reaches its absolute breaking point in the third act battle. The entire conflict is resolved not through a clash of ideals, a brilliant strategic maneuver, or a deeply personal sacrifice, but through a series of convenient coincidences. When Frank Castle shoots at Jean from a distance, the scene lacks any realistic spatial awareness or tactical logic. Spider-Man taking the bullet makes zero sense when his spider sense and agility should have allowed him to neutralize the shooter or move Jean out of the way entirely. Having him jump directly into the path of a high-caliber round, only to be instantly resurrected and healed by Jean's mystical powers seconds later, completely eliminates any real sense of danger or stakes. It feels like watching children play with action figures in a sandbox, inventing brand new rules on the spot whenever a character gets hurt. What makes this writing so infuriating is that it completely breaks the established internal logic of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For over a decade, this franchise built its massive success on the idea that actions have consequences, technology has limitations, and magic operates under specific rules. When you throw those rules out the window in favor of cheap emotional shortcuts and miraculous technological devices, the entire universe loses its weight. If Jean Grey can effortlessly heal lethal gunshot wounds in a matter of seconds without any physical toll or consequence, why should the audience ever fear for a hero's life in future movies? If a high schooler's phone app can scan the cosmos for alternate realities, why did the Avengers spend years struggling to navigate quantum energy and spatial gateways? The disrespect toward the audience's intelligence becomes even more insulting when you look closely at how the media and public within the movie react to Spider-Man. In previous installments, the public perception of Spider-Man was a complex, constantly evolving dynamic shaped by media narratives, J. Jonah Jameson's smear campaigns, and Peter's heroic actions. In this film, the world feels completely static and lifeless. Citizens react like non-playable characters in a video game, cheering or panicking strictly on command without any consistent in-universe logic. The rich, living version of New York City that used to feel like a character in its own right has been replaced by a generic green screen backdrop that exists solely to give the actors something to stand in front of. The dialogue throughout the entire script further amplifies this overall feeling of artificiality. Modern cinematic dialogue should feel sharp, natural, and reflective of modern human interaction, especially when dealing with a fast-talking hero from Queens. Yet the lines given to Peter in this film sound like generic superhero cliches copy-pasted from decades-old cartoons. The natural, modern banter that made Tom Holland's portrayal so relatable is entirely absent, replaced by exposition-heavy monologues that explain things the audience can clearly see on screen. Instead of letting scenes breathe and allowing visual storytelling to convey emotion, characters constantly announce their feelings, their motivations, and their plans out loud, stripping the film of any real artistic subtlety. This reliance on overt exposition completely ruins the mystery surrounding Peter's mutation. Body horror and biological transformations are inherently visceral storytelling tools. They rely on visual cues, physical discomfort, and psychological dread to make the audience feel the hero's suffering. But instead of letting the camera focus on the terrifying reality of Peter's body turning against him, the movie repeatedly stops the action to have secondary characters explain biological mechanics in clunky, pseudoscientific jargon. It turns a concept that should have been terrifying and intimate into a boring, clinical lecture that completely kills any atmospheric tension the director was trying to establish. When you step back and look at the broader landscape of modern superhero cinema, Spider-Man Brand New Day represents a terrifying trend of corporate storytelling taking priority over creative integrity. It is a movie constructed backward, starting with a list of corporate mandates, upcoming character introductions, and marketable toy opportunities, then wrapping a paper-thin script around those business goals. Spider-Man is no longer being treated as a complex human character navigating the heavy burden of responsibility. He is being used as a high-profile marketing vehicle to sell the next phase of a cinematic universe. When a franchise prioritizes setting up future projects over delivering a satisfying, self-contained story, the quality of the immediate film inevitably plummets. This corporate-driven approach is precisely why the pacing feels so incredibly disjointed from start to finish. Every time the story attempts to focus on Peter's internal struggle, it is abruptly interrupted by an awkward setup for a future MCU property. The movie refuses to stay present in its own narrative world. It is constantly winking at the camera, dropping forced references to mutants, gesturing toward cosmic threats, and setting up future crossovers that the current movie hasn't earned the right to tease. A great film earns its post-credits excitement by first delivering a masterpiece in the preceding 2 hours. When the preceding 2 hours are a structural mess, teasing future movies doesn't create excitement. It creates profound exhaustion. That structural exhaustion reaches its ultimate breaking point when you dissect the infamous post-credits sequence and its absurd reliance on Ned's spider tracker application. Up until this scene, a viewer might try to rationalize the film's flaws as mere creative stumbles, a rushed script, a mismanaged villain, or studio interference. But the post-credits sequence completely shatters any remaining goodwill. The camera pans away from a helpless Peter Parker, zooming out through the atmosphere, past Earth's orbit, and into the vast expanse of deep space, ending with a neon notification on a phone screen declaring that a new Spider-Man has been located across the cosmos. Fan channels immediately exploded with insane theories, claiming this is a high-level narrative masterstroke intended to bridge Brand New Day directly into Avengers Doomsday. The prevailing theory suggests that this childish app somehow locked onto Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in a completely different universe, right as an incursion wipes out his reality. But calling this scene a brilliant connection is an insult to basic storytelling. It is, without a doubt, one of the most pathetic, lazy, and fundamentally senseless plot devices in modern cinematic history. It assumes the audience will blindly accept any nonsensical twist as long as it teases nostalgia and future multiverse cameos. Think about the sheer impossibility of what this scene asks us to believe. We are expected to accept that Ned leads a teenager coding on a commercial laptop in a standard apartment, wrote a software program so infinitely advanced that it can casually breach dimensional barriers, bypass reality-warping physics, and track an individual across infinite alternate timelines without a single server relay, quantum satellite, or interdimensional bridge, even inside Earth. 616. The app's internal logic is utterly broken. How does a simple mobile application detect Spider-Man's presence? Is it tracking standard cellular signals? If so, why does it only register when he is in the suit, but completely fails to detect him when he dresses as Peter Parker? If the app isn't tracking standard radio waves or cellular data, the only other pseudo-scientific explanation the film hints at is that the software scans for biological mutations or unique spider DNA. But that explanation makes the concept even more absurd. For a mobile phone to actively scan the surrounding environment for specific genetic signatures without any physical laboratory equipment or biosensors is pure fantasy writing. It turns a standard smartphone into an all-seeing, omnipotent, magical tool. Furthermore, as established earlier in the film, the app pinpoints Spider-Man inside MJ's private home and environment, completely free of public security cameras or external sensors. If a teenager's app can instantly track Peter Parker's exact biological location in private spaces, it means any halfway competent hacker or villain in New York could tap into that code and assassinate Peter in his sleep. Taking this broken terrestrial logic and pushing it into outer space pushes the script into absolute nonsense. How do data packets from a standard human smartphone travel faster than the speed of light across interstellar space, let alone jump into entirely separate realities? Tony Stark, a multi-billionaire technological genius who created nanotech, time travel, and defense satellites needed specialized hardware and interstellar relays just to send basic distress signals across space. Yet we are expected to swallow the idea that Ned's high school coding project can project standard wireless signals through dimensional rifts and output a clean UI notification on a budget smartphone. It betrays a total lack of effort from a writing team that clearly threw logic out the window because they couldn't be bothered to craft an actual, grounded post-credit setup. If Marvel's ultimate plan is truly to use a fairy tale phone tracker to bring Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man into Avengers Doomsday, it proves that the creative brain trust at the studio has completely run out of real ideas. Relying on convenient plot holes and magical apps to force multiverse crossovers completely destroys the stakes of the entire saga. When narrative bridges are built on such insulting, childish foundations, the emotional payoff of seeing legacy characters returns to zero. A cameo only matters if the journey to reach that moment feels earned, logical, and structurally sound. Using a broken mobile game interface to link two massive cinematic universes is the pinnacle of lazy filmmaking. When you sit down and look at the entire scope of Spider-Man: Brand New Day, the verdict is painfully clear. At the start of this review, it felt fair to call this film below average. But after analyzing the repetitive character loops, the complete misuse of top-tier talent like Sadie Sink, the pointless fan service cameos, and the insultingly dumb post-credit scene, calling it average is far too generous. This is a genuinely terrible movie. It is a feature film designed not for mature comic book readers, not for lifelong Spider-Man fans, and certainly not for anyone who values coherent storytelling. It is a surface-level product built exclusively to keep children under 13 mildly entertained for 2 hours, while covertly serving as a setup vehicle for the MCU's upcoming mutant saga. Using a character as legendary, emotionally rich, and globally beloved as Spider-Man, merely as an introductory stepping stone for Jean Grey, is one of the greatest creative failures in modern superhero cinema. Peter Parker deserves grounded struggles, intense personal stakes, brilliant scientific problem-solving, and meaningful human relationships. Instead, he was handed a script filled with childish plot conveniences, meaningless action beats, and broken internal logic. Spider-Man: Brand New Day completely fails to respect the character's legacy, standing as a massive misfire that leaves the future of the franchise in a deeply frustrating position. If you enjoyed this honest breakdown and want to support the channel's independent content, please drop a like, share the video, and hit that subscribe button. And if you truly appreciate our deep dive reviews and want to keep MovieCast thriving, consider dropping a $25 super thanks down below. Your support means everything to us. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.